good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, depending if you're following online. And welcome to the most, I would say, we always leave till the end of the day the most exciting panel. So, I mean, we are going to have, hopefully, a very exciting discussion about quite of the more, I would say, one of the key treaties that governs the international community, and specifically the nuclear non-proliferation regime, which is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which, as we know, it's currently, or some experts in the field might say that it's currently in a state of crisis. Some others say that everything works fine. So, we are living in some kind of dualistic reality regarding the NPT and the nuclear non-proliferation regime. And I think that what we are going to try to do here today is try to go beyond this dualistic approach to the treaty and to the regime. We are going to try to delve into the things that can work or don't work outside not on the review process, because many people only focus on the review process. We're going to try to give a more holistic approach and perspective on the treaty and the nuclear non-proliferation regime. For this, we have quite a wonderful set and terrific set of panelists and speakers today with us. The way I will manage the panel would be, first I will introduce the speakers. I will provide them with some specific questions that they already know that need to answer, and then I will pass to the next speaker. So in this case, I will first start with Ambassador Hakan Rahmetulin. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. Perfect. Ambassador Rahmetulin is the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Previously, he served as the permanent representative of the Republic of Kazakhstan to the United Nations in New York between 2022 and 2024. And he's first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kazakhstan between 2021 and 2024. He also served as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Kazakhstan to the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. He was Director of the Department of Multilateral Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he holds a diplomatic rank of Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Envoy of the First Class. Well, Ambassador Rahmatulin has been invited here today because he served as chair of the second session of the preparatory committee for the 2026 NPT Review Conference, which was held in summer this year. And Ambassador, so could you tell us, according to your opinion, and as your position during the RevCon, what have been the main results of the 2024 RevCon? What were the key factors, according to you, that prevented the achievement of what we can call a successful outcome, or in this case, an outcome document? And which of the positive developments and issues could be carried forward and built on at the 2025 RevCon and subsequently to the 2026 RevCon?
Thank you very much, dear Manuel. Dear colleagues, great to be here. And I'm very thankful to the organizers of this event for inviting me here, for giving me the opportunity to see my friends here and to get acquainted with new friends and new colleagues, and for giving me the opportunity, to move from -10 to +5 to just warm up a bit here in Brussels. Yes, actually, during my preparation to the second RevCon, during my run-up to it, I've held a number of different meetings with all stakeholders, with all participating states, to understand what they expect from the President-elect, what they expect not only from myself, but from the entire team and from the preparatory process to the review conference. And the main observation is that the NPT is very demanded, though we can witness that many countries are putting into question whether it's relevant or not, but overall understanding that it is relevant. And of course, we have an understanding that the NPT faces a lot of challenges these days, and these challenges may be described in the words being used since yesterday. It's polarization, it's politizations of many issues. But what is interesting, what I observed, that countries, while preparing, while talking to me, they all share the importance of each and every component of the NPT. each and every pillar and its every component. But the main difference was that how they see these components, these commitments should be implemented, in which way, how, for example, it touches upon the issue of transparency and accountability, it touches upon reporting, voluntary or non-voluntary, and many other issues. And I would say that under Pillar 1, aside from the traditional grievances over the lack of progress in disarmament, many countries raised their issue, their concern about nuclear sharing. Again, that nuclear sharing, how nuclear sharing deteriorates the non-proliferation process, how it, or on the other hand, how it helps to the non-proliferation of WMD. And again, for example, mechanism of transparency and accountability, including the idea of interactive discussions on national reports and standardized reporting templates for nuclear weapon states remain equally popular theme within this cycle, and it will likely gain more prominence if we go forward, and I think it will be again touched upon. It's been touched upon before during the first PrepCom, then the second PrepCom, and I'm more than sure that it will have a place on the final PrepCom next year. As far the Pillar 2 is concerned, delegations also expressed their varying views on situation around DPRK, and I'm also very happy and very glad that situation DPRK, how it influences the overall global situation of disarmament, non-proliferation, was discussed during this event. At the same time, the issue of nuclear naval propulsion and entailing non-proliferation risks is only likely to attract more attention as we approach the review conference next year. Again, under the Pillar 2, the nuclear and security, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant naturally remained on a very strong concern for all states, and led to lengthy debate on the subject as well. And you can imagine that given the composition of the NPT and the participating states, how acute were the discussions on this subject. Apart from that, in addition to that, the Iran nuclear program was also among the points of contention. A wide group of delegations pushed for stronger language to be reflected in the factual summary, with strong pushback, what is natural from the opposite side. Pillar 3 remained relatively unplugged by political divisions, aside from the release of LPS treated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And many developing states reconfirmed their inalienable right emanating from the NPT to develop, research, produce, and utilize nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without any discrimination. I also wanted to touch upon the issue that Manuel, you asked about the final document, the outcome document, and we all remember that the final document, the last final document from the review conference was adopted quite long ago, almost quarter,
more than years.
Yeah, and also many delegations expected that we would produce kind of factual summary as the outcome of this second PrepCom. But again, given the overall political context, it was very challenging, and approaching to the second PrepCom, we were sober enough and realistic enough to understand that it would be quite difficult and challenging to first make the factual summary, or to make at least, to create at least the chair's perception, reflection of the second preparatory committee. And before starting my work, I met with our colleague, the chair of the first PrepCom, our ambassador of Finland, Jarmo Viinanen. We exchanged views with him about the challenges, about the possible ways to go. But again, it was really very challenging, and I can just recall, actually, instead of 10 days, we worked for 9 days officially, because it was in Geneva, and one day was national day, a national work holiday, and during which the UN was closed, and we used this day to have informal consultations in our mission, and it helped us a lot to elaborate, to concentrate on the concerns by many delegations and to try to adopt a document. And I repeatedly been telling my colleagues during our run-up and during the PrepCom as such, that my idea was not to please everyone, not to make everyone happy with the final document, with the flow of discussions, but to make them least unhappy. Because, again, given the context, it was absolutely impossible to make everyone happy or to make someone happy and someone not happy. So the task was to make them least unhappy. And we tried different models, different options to go. And we've chosen the one to take on board everything what was expressed during the deliberations during this 2 weeks exercise. And apart from that, we've been engaged as I mentioned, in various negotiations, consultations with all stakeholders, regardless of their, political preferences or being a nuclear, non-nuclear. With some delegations, we met more than 10 times. So it was a numerous, contacts with all stakeholders interested. And we created a document which was the draft document which collected all concerns expressed by all delegations. What helped me, I think, finally, when I convinced different delegations from Western countries, from NAM Group, Russia, Iran, to agree with the document, with the final document. I think that one of the main reasons for that was that we followed the pattern I promised to follow, to be as open, as receptive, as transparent as possible, and to take on board every concern, to be open to everyone. And there were some concerns before we, started our exercise that, for Kazakhstan or for myself, belonging to the region where I come from, having very unique neighborhood, having unique geopolitical context, it would be more difficult even to get some kind of consensus, because many countries of my region, for example, or Kazakhstan actually, is friend to everyone and enemy to none. And our feeling was that it may play with us some bad joke, and like some countries in our region may demand from us much more they would have demanded from country from other region. But on the contrary, it really played a good job for us, I think, and also it's readiness of other delegations, of all delegations involved into trying to find out the outcome and to bring about the document, at least the chairmanship reflection. And I think we managed, and we created a document. I heard some opinion when I've been presenting that document that Mr. Chairperson, honestly speaking, we are not really very happy with this document. I said for myself, yes, I am not very happy with the document. But finally, we adopted the document. As far as we move towards the 11th review conference, I think that state parties should focus on areas where further progress can be achieved through realistic flexibility and compromise. The main word is a compromise and readiness to, if they want to get something, they have to give something in exchange. It's really impossible to only to get without giving away some, just making a compromise. While politicized and polarized exchanges are inevitable, delegations should be prepared for seeking compromises on different possible consensus, towards consensus. And our strong conviction that European states have an important role to play in the NPT forum due to their status as a member of several cross-cutting and cross-regional initiatives. To some of them, Kazakhstan also part is, like Stockholm Initiative, NPDI, and RNC. For example, the issue of risk reduction remained major focus on discussions at the latest RevCon. Again, not many countries were happy with this idea of risk reduction, but it still represents the area where countries can concentrate to sit and to discuss. Also, we have to take measures to avoid accidents due to escalation, miscalculation, miscommunication, and misperception. Numerous good ideas have been proposed over the years, such as crisis communication channels and negotiations on follow-up arrangements in nuclear arms control and disarmament. And we understand that while risk reduction is not a substitute for nuclear disarmament, certain constructive ideas and proposals have good potential to enable positive engagement. So, you know, as the result of such kind of sometimes difficult and tough negotiation, we can crystallize, not maybe to the extent we all want to, but to some certain extent, some concrete proposals and some ideas. So it's really very, we have to be very persistent, but at the same time, absolutely sober about the forthcoming 11th review conference. That two previous review conferences ended with nothing. Many delegations expressed their concern and said that the review process is being ruined. But still, attending such a conference, review conference, it gives quite a great opportunity for all delegations to at least sit together and to touch upon the issues of their concern. So I stop for the time being here, and thank you very much.
No, many thanks for your words, and also many thanks for this kind of quite innovative approach, which is to try to make people less unhappy as possible. So I think, I don't know if that actually worked, but I mean, at least it's quite innovative, I would say. Then now I'm heading to my left, to Joseph Ballard, coordinator of the CTBTO's Legal and External Relations Division, where he's responsible for the strategic program and project coordination of the division. Before joining the CTBTO, Joseph was an assessment manager in New Zealand's Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, leading a team of analysts working on a range of international security issues, including nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Between 2014 and 2020, he worked in the Office of Strategic and Policy at the OPCW, with a focus on OPCW's policy work on chemical security and the threat of chemical terrorism. So, Joseph, my questions to you are more, of course, they are quite related to the focus of what the CTBTO does and what are the perspectives of the CTBTO on certain specific events. So, what do you consider to have been specifically the impact of Russia's de-ratification of the CTBT on the, in this case, on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation regime more generally, and what is your assessment of the possibility that Russia or the United States, as some reports suggest, might decide to resume nuclear testing? And finally, what are the main strategies that the CTBTO employs to achieve the entry into force of the CTBT right now? Many thanks. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here with this very distinguished group of panelists and to address this very distinguished audience. So thank you very much for having me here today. Dr. Floyd regrets that he couldn't be here himself. He's been somewhat occupied this week with getting reappointed for another term of 4 years as Executive Secretary of CTBTO. So we're all very pleased, successfully, yes indeed. So we're all very pleased for him and also for the organization that we'll have him for until 2029. So I'll just say at the outset that the views that I'm about to present are my own, do not necessarily represent those of the CTBTO Preparatory Commission. But at the same time, I am an official of the CTBTO, so there's some limits as to what I can say about some issues, but I will definitely address the questions that you just put to me, Manuel. So the NPT and the CTBT, why is someone from CTBTO sitting here talking about the NPT? Well, of course, these two treaties are intrinsically linked. They were negotiated at very different times. The NPT's preamble talks about a cessation of nuclear tests, and there's a reason for that. A ban on nuclear tests is a really great idea. I think it's hard to find anyone who thinks it's a terrible idea. Obviously, stopping nuclear tests has a really positive environmental impacts, positive impacts on human health. But that's not why the CTBT was negotiated. It's about putting a brake on the proliferation of nuclear weapons and helping to move us a step towards nuclear disarmament. And the CTBT's preamble recognizes this by talking about how ending nuclear testing is a way to constrain the development and improvement of nuclear weapons and the development of advanced new types of weapons. So we're talking not only about non-proliferation stopping, but also we're talking about the development of new nuclear arsenals. I mention this because it's tempting in some ways to think about CTBT as being, one of these treaties that belongs a little bit to the past or addresses issues of the past, but it very much addresses issues that we are dealing with right now and will probably continue to, almost certainly will continue to deal with. So the NPT and the CTBT very clearly align with each other, and I think it's worth recalling that the RevCon outcomes, the successful RevCon outcomes, have really had the CTBT right in the middle of them. The 1995 outcome, of course, was what stimulated the final negotiation and conclusion of the CTBT itself. It was, in 2010 or 2000, rather, let's go back to 2000. It was like step 1 on the 13 practical steps. 2010, it was 5 of the 64 action points. So the reason I mention this is not just to kind of do a little history lesson, but it's also important to recall the central importance of a test ban to the NPT, and particular to a credible outcome on the disarmament pillar. And I'll come back a little bit later in these remarks to what that might mean in 2026. So looking out beyond the NPT context, where are we today? Well, I don't know if any of you have ever heard Robert Floyd speak. He's a bit of an evangelist about the CTBT. He's always full of optimism. I mean, we talked about optimism in the first panel yesterday, and I think we are sort of professional optimists. We have to be. But there is reason for that, and when it comes to the CTBT. Obviously, it's not in force, but only one country has tested a nuclear weapon this century. Before the treaty was concluded, there were more than 2,000 nuclear tests. Since then, there's been fewer than a dozen. That's a dramatic success, and the contribution of the CTBT itself to that is probably quite important. I won't say it's the only contribution, but it's certainly being a really, really important part of that. So once it was a norm. Nuclear testing was a norm. On average, every 9 days from when nuclear tests started till 1996, we would have a test, and we've only had a dozen since 1997. So we flipped that norm. The norm now is not to test, and it's really important that we keep that norm. And the biggest challenge with a test ban, of course, as everybody knows, and what held up into the 1990s is verification. Well, today, our international monitoring system is more than 90% complete. No country can test in secret. It just can't happen. Our precision with our IMS now, it's not 100% complete, but it's well below what the treaty's negotiators wanted. They wanted around a kiloton detection. We can probably detect around half of that anywhere in the world. So we'll see it, but we'll also see it if it doesn't happen. And I just want to quickly digress here. Some of you may have seen recently, there were a couple of earthquakes in northern Iran. And on the social media, there were some opportunists, let's say, who started talking about, oh, maybe this is this could be a nuclear test. What are the Iranians up to? There's probably a large element of disinformation going on here. But what we were able to do with our detection capabilities is say, well, no, these were very, very clearly earthquakes. These correspond to the earthquakes that we've seen in that region before. So we collected that data, we analyzed it, we shared it with our state signatories, and we took our step further by publishing our findings on social media. So I think this is it's a really interesting example of how our system continues to support peace and security even as international tensions are rising. And it made an impact because our data and our analysis are independent, they are credible, and they're reliable. And they will remain that way as long as we have the resources to do what we're mandated to do. But that brings me to another point. Our IMS is getting pretty old now. I mean, we started setting up our stations, our first stations, more than 20 years ago. Investment is required to keep that system operating, and this is a big issue in front of our preparatory commission at the moment. We have put a proposal to our states on how to fund that, but it's a lot of money. A worldwide network of this capability is expensive. But this is important because today any country considering a nuclear test knows that first of all the CTBTO will detect it and the world will know about it, and second of all there'll be global opprobrium to deal with and surely more consequences than that. And I don't think anyone wants that situation to change. So there's global momentum towards universalization of the CTBTO as well. The international community doesn't want that situation to change either. We've got 178 states that have ratified the CTBT, 187 have signed it, 9 states in the last 30 months. So people aren't walking away from the CTBT. So Russia, I've been asked to address this question. Russia's stated rationale for that decision was not linked to the object and purpose of the CTBT. They said they wanted to put themselves on the same footing as the United States, which of course has not yet ratified the CTBT. So that's what they said. What did they do? Well, it's worth noting that just a couple of months after the Russian decision to de-ratify the CTBT, the final station in the Russian Federation's IMS segment was completed and certified, and Russia has publicly committed to continuing its engagement in the CTBTO. So obviously this was a very disappointing decision, deeply regrettable, as the EEAS said at the time. It adds another data point to the bigger, perhaps more worrying picture about the state of the multilateral disarmament arms control architecture. But for us, it didn't practically change our operating environment. Russia's status in the Preparatory Commission didn't change at all. And since then, there have been more ratifications. So we still have that momentum going in the right direction. But for us, the Russian decision really does highlight this Annex II problem that we have. I think everybody knows we need all the Annex II states to be able to have the treaty enter into force. There are 9 countries whose ratifications are still required. We can't treat them as a monolith. It's not one group, or even consider that each country has finally decided its position with regard to the CTBT, or that internal debates cannot change on these questions over time. We have to look at each country on its merits, understand its motivations, understand also that certain countries' decisions on this issue are linked to other countries' decisions on this issue. So why entry into force? I was talking with a colleague earlier who said, well, why do we need entry into force? CTBT works pretty well. I mean, yes, that's true, but without entry into force, we don't have legally binding obligations. We don't have a fully functioning verification regime, which means that fully functioning IMS with confidence building measures, with consultation and clarifications, with the possibility of on-site inspections. So if you have a country that possibly tests and they deny it, there's not really much anyone can do. When we enter into force, there is something that can be done about that. So we're focused on this question, definitely focused on it. We do a lot of outreach on it. We have the Article 14 process. It really is in the hands of our state signatories. Entry into force of the CTBT is not a responsibility of the Preparatory Commission or even the PTS, but of the state signatories as a whole. And they can do that in part through the NPT process. So I'll just wrap up. 26 RevCon in the CTBT. What would a useful outcome look like from a CTBT perspective? So I'll give you 3 suggestions. First, states parties should be encouraged to update and reaffirm the commitments they've made at previous RevCons in relation to nuclear testing. They definitely have to recommit to moratoria. And this seems like a baseline. This is something that you just cannot walk away without. Secondly, one of the key concerns that many have about holding the line on nuclear testing relates to certain rumors, discussions, even statements about nuclear weapon states preparing to resume nuclear explosive testing. This has been mentioned in a couple of panels previously. And the potential that activities at nuclear testing sites, even if they're not intended to restart nuclear tests, could lead to misunderstandings and overreactions, or even someone else to start testing. So the NPT has an opportunity here to consider encouraging the nuclear weapon states to put in place transparency measures, confidence building measures that would diminish the chance of those misunderstandings taking place. And finally, I'll just say in a self-interested way that the RevCon should emphasize the importance of sustaining the international monitoring system. As I mentioned, this is really, really important that we maintain the investment in the system, that we keep it operating, and that it remains rather an effective and reliable system that continues to support the norm against nuclear testing. Thank you.
Many thanks. Many thanks, Joseph, for your words. I'm quite confident that you are optimistic about the CTBT, although some people might challenge that idea. Now we are moving on to our next speaker, Jacek Bilica, coordinator Chief of Cabinet for the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. And actually, I'm quite sorry for this because I provided you with the most difficult questions for today, so I'm sorry for that. Well, in any case, the IAEA deals with at least two pillars of the NPT, non-proliferation and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. How much debate on these two pillars in the NPT review process, including in the last RevCon, as well as on the overall geopolitical situation, affects the debates and negotiations inside the International Atomic Energy Agency? Also, how is the agency dealing with the latest challenges posed by Iran and Iran's nuclear program? What is the status of the negotiation on the implementation of the safeguard agreement between the agency and Australia, particularly in the framework of AUKUS? Because here we have spoken about the naval propulsion. And also, could you also please provide us with updates on the work that you are performing in Ukraine, including the CNPP and other Ukrainian facilities? Quite difficult questions.
Yes, quite the list. Thank you very much, Manuel, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's very good to see so many old friends and colleagues in the room. I must say that from time to time I'm asked to speak to young diplomats who come to Vienna, either being assigned there or on a visit, get acquainted visit, and I always make a point of encouraging them to specialize in multilateral diplomacy, and specifically in this field of ours, dealing with confidence-building measures, arms control, arms export control, non-proliferation, disarmament. This area of multilateral diplomacy, which on the surface of it, it's very confusing. It's an alphabet soup of abbreviations. CWC and CCW, BWC and CCPNM, ATT and NPT. What the hell are you dealing with? Yes, your colleagues would ask. Well, actually, the question of what is the purpose of this field has been already raised in one of the previous panels. And this is a very serious issue. I mean, we are not dealing here with alphabet. We are dealing with issues of war and peace, life and death. Nothing could be more serious as a task for a diplomat. So what is the purpose of all these instruments, including the NPT? The first purpose is to decrease a risk of a war breaking out. And if we fail, as we sometimes do, it is to decrease the number of victims of this war. And if we fail, as we sometimes do, at least to decrease the suffering of those victims. If you think about these three levels, and you think about the instruments from, Vienna instrument in the OSCE, to the Ottawa Convention or the prohibitions on chemical weapons, they fit somewhere in this continuum. Decrease the risk of war, limit the number and suffering of its victims. So this is not a time for complacency now. We all see what is happening. It's time for action to address the deterioration of the global architecture of non-proliferation, disarmament, arms control. And we at the International Atomic Energy Agency, especially headed by Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi, are doing exactly this, engaging on all these issues. Tonight, DG Grossi will be traveling from Baku, where he participated in the COP, to Tehran to deal with one of the most serious regional issues. So while I'm going to come back to your questions, I'd like to start with those regional issues which are on our agenda. Iran has a very developed nuclear program. We have our inspectors there all the time. They are inspecting. However, we are unable to provide the international community with assurances about complete peaceful nature of this program. They are enriching uranium to 60%. No other country apart from nuclear weapon states does it. There is no credible peaceful use for this material. They are not implementing additional protocol. Our inspections are based on comprehensive safeguards agreement. The agency has lost continuity of knowledge of the program. The DG has flagged to the Board of Governors that there are serious concerns about not only correctness, but also completeness of Iranian declarations. Hence, engagement. Hence, an effort to resolve these outstanding issues. The effort is ongoing now as we speak. Another example from the region is Syria. For many years, Syrian item was on the agenda of the Board of Governors. DG Grossi traveled to Damascus in March of this year, met with the president, agreed a new engagement. And so this has allowed the IAEA to conduct visits to relevant locations and to take environmental samples in these locations. The results of analysis are still pending. More broadly, in the Middle East, the agency is participating in the process in the United Nations of the sessions on the creation of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. We are providing background documentation, expertise, because nuclear power is expanding in the Middle East. There are now countries which have nuclear facilities, new nuclear facilities. United Arab Emirates, Egypt is building. The DG has called upon all countries of the region to join the NPT and to implement comprehensive safeguards, to give this assurance to the international community, because obviously the nuclear is increasing, the amount of nuclear material is increasing, but it should be done in a way which doesn't give rise to concerns. DPRK, this is a case where the NPT has really been abused. And so the agency has lost an ability to inspect DPRK, but we are ready. We have a team which is watching the program from afar, and we would be ready to engage, inspect, if there is an agreement which will be reached. And we had cases of attempts of reaching this agreement. So these are examples of some regional issues, because unfortunately the attractiveness of nuclear weapons in recent years has grown. We see this in many statements, many of whom were mentioned here earlier in this conference. You had a question about pillars 2 and 3 and how they affect the IAEA. We should say that these are overlapping issues and yet separate institutions, because obviously the topics are very much the same. Mm-hmm. We, however, have our own policy-making organs, and so we are dealing with these regional issues I mentioned while they are being discussed in the NPT, loosely based on Article 7, where there is a subsidiary body of Main Committee 2 which discusses all those issues. When it comes to Pillar 3, the peaceful uses pillar, the agency is one of the places where these peaceful uses, peaceful applications are being implemented through our technical cooperation program and also through the initiatives of DG Grossi, such as Rays of Hope. This is radiology, this is dealing with cancer. So these are examples where the IAEA can be seen as an instrument of the implementation, both in Pillar 2, which is safeguards, non-proliferation, and Pillar 3, which is peaceful uses. You asked me to speak about nuclear naval propulsion. Mm-hmm. It is a new topic when it comes to the implementation. However, it has been envisioned. It is in the documents, it just hasn't been implemented yet. So the Secretariat continues to engage both with Australia and in Brazil through technical discussions related to the safeguards arrangements which will be required under their respective safeguards agreements with the agency. We need to work out the safeguards approaches. This will take time because also the programs are long-term programs, and the DG is keeping the Board of Governors informed. Actually, there will be reports on these two cases to the Board of Governors, which is meeting next week in Vienna. There will be updates provided to member states on our dialogues, both with Australia and Brazil. You asked about Ukrainian nuclear facilities. I had an opportunity to mention it earlier. We have been involved from the beginning of the war with a very clear focus: prevent another nuclear accident or radiological accident. And so far we've been successful, or maybe we've been lucky, but we have been deploying people to Ukraine. We have been providing equipment to Ukraine. We have negotiated an ability for IAEA experts to be stationed on a rotational basis also on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant beyond the front line. And just last week, on the 5th of November, we have done another rotation across the front line with 4 new experts, which is the 25th team deployed to Zaporizhia. And at the same time, we provide information to the international community. IAEA is the only source of independent information about the situation there, which is provided through updates on the website of IAEA, Director General updates. I think we have issued something like 250 since the beginning of the war. At the request of President Zelensky, DG has also decided to deploy visits or to conduct missions to the 7 electrical substations in Ukraine. The visits happened in September and October, and the teams observed extensive damages to those visited substations and the significant reductions of the capabilities of the Ukrainian electrical grid to provide off-site power supply to Ukrainian NPPs. These 7 substations we have identified as being relevant to the Ukrainian nuclear power plants. And you would recall I mentioned it in one of the previous sessions that Ukraine is increasingly relying on nuclear generation of electricity. Around 60% of Ukrainian electricity now comes from the nuclear power plants. That's why it is so important to keep them safe and secure. Let's recall that a nuclear accident not only affects the people in the vicinity, but also more broadly, even when there is no reach of nuclear material. As the most obvious example is that the Fukushima nuclear accident
Well, many thanks for your intervention, Jacek. And I mean, we all know, I mean, I think that everyone here in this room knows the invaluable work that the agency does, and we must be really thankful for all the work that the agency does, both in terms of safeguards implementation and also nuclear security. So in that case, I think that the agency is quite an invaluable asset for global governance. Now I'm moving to a different perspective, let's say, on the nuclear non-proliferation regime. I'm moving to Tarja Kronberg, Distinguished Associate Fellow within CIPRI's Armaments and the Disarmament Research Area. So, Tarja, some experts and national delegates argue that the NPT is no longer fit for purpose and should be replaced as an instrument to govern the nuclear non-proliferation regime. What potential negative impact do you see in case of some countries to decide to leave the treaty, or the treaty collapses altogether? And do you think it is possible to negotiate or amend the NPT in the current situation of geopolitical rivalries and deep division among both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states? Tarja? Thanks.
Thank you.
Easy questions as well.
The ambassador just introduced a new evaluation basis for the NPT. People should be, or delegates should be happy with the NPT. My task is to try to prevent them from leaving the NPT. So I will try to touch upon some of the issues, two on proliferation or non-proliferation, and two on disarmament that actually are central in the NPT and should in some way be amended, taken in order to avoid people leaving the NPT or reduce the crisis situation of the NPT. And I'm talking as an individual researcher, not as a representative of an institution, although I do have a background as a member of the European Parliament and chair of the Iran delegation, so I may come into this. But two issues on non-proliferation or proliferation. I would like to start with the critical issue in the NPT, which was discussed at the start of the negotiations in the NPT at the 60s, how to prevent that non-nuclear weapon states are attacked by nuclear weapons. This is a question of negative security assurances, and it was discussed. No mention is made in the NPT. In 1995, there was a general P5, each commented that, well, they would not attack non-nuclear weapon states, possibly only in the case if they were in alliance with a nuclear weapon state. Since then, a lot of additional conditions have been attached, so in which cases the nuclear weapon state could attack non-nuclear weapon states with nuclear weapons. One is WMD use, other is critical infrastructure, and so forth. In addition, not only have these negative security assurances become more conditional, they also lack the quality of being legally binding. So I think what is needed, and what I think is actually going on, and I'm hopeful in this respect, in 2022, yes, RevCon, there was an idea that unconditional, legally binding negative security assurances should be made to a law, so that it was clearly defined within the NPT. Another possibility is to take in an annex to the NPT, actually giving these negative security assurances. Of course, The problem will be, and this is then the negotiation, the nuclear weapon states like to preserve all their alternatives, and the ambiguity in the nuclear, on the negative security assurances is an advantage for them. So this is to be aware of. The second non-proliferation issue in the NPT regime is, of course, the nuclear, or the WMD-free zone in the Middle East. This is a difficult issue. It has been, it was a precondition for the making the NPT permanent, and it's really a trust issue for the NPT. If this is not achieved, then trust into NPT is failing. And so this has been a continuous issue in the review conferences, and nothing has happened. In the last review conference in 22, all the Arab states stood up and said that we have to start implementing the resolution from 1995, which is the WMD-free zone in the Middle East. And I don't think anything is happening, and actually the issue has moved to the UN instead of the NPT. So the question is this impossible? And it is difficult today. I mean, I attended the other discussion on the Middle East, and there's a creeping proliferation. Iran has been mentioned. There's the question of a regional war, maybe, and there's the question of isolation from the American new administration. So in these conditions, what can happen to actually support the NPT in this? I think there's one positive sign, and that's that there's some political will in Iran, and there's some political will in Saudi Arabia, and they will meet next week or the week after at the UN and hopefully discuss the Middle East nuclear weapon-free zone. The task of the group in the UN is to continue until this will become a reality. The two issues, so the non-proliferation is problematic, but it's not impossible. The two issues I want to touch upon in disarmament are more difficult, maybe impossible. The first is the relationship between the NPT and the TPNW. We know that the P5 are strongly opposed to the TPNW, while the TPNW has actually declared that they are complementary to the NPT, particularly the Article 6, which is about disarmament, and they have carried out disarmament negotiations, and there's a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. Now, would it be possible to have a dialogue between the B5 and the member states or representative of the member states of the TPNW to discuss this question? Is it possible? The question is that there's this conflict between disarmament and nuclear deterrence, and a discussion on this issue would necessarily deal with nuclear deterrence. My last point is the question of nuclear threats. I only have 1 minute, so I will just refer to the work that has been done in the European Leadership Network on the inadmissibility of nuclear threats within the NPT regime. And it's an important work in the sense that it actually looks at the inadmissibility of nuclear threats and how this could be taken care of in the 26th review conference. A few words about leaving the NPT. The risk is, of course, right now that Iran may leave the NPT if there's a war, if the proliferation problem becomes greater. Iran has actually made an agreement, the JCPOA, not to become a nuclear weapon state. The situation, they are now evaluating their doctrine. This may happen. Also, the Arab states may walk out of, Egypt has already walked out once, the Arab states may walk out of the of the RevCon next time if there's nothing happening on the resolution from the 1995. And the question of the negative security assurances is also important in this respect. So there are things that can be done, but they should also be done. I agree, action is needed.
Many thanks, Anna. We certainly agree that action is needed and more discussion and diplomacy should, should take place. We are going to go with our last speaker, last but not least. So, Irma Argüello, founder and chair of the Non-Proliferation for Global Security, NPS Global Foundation in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And Irma, we are going to focus also now on the TPNW because, the TPNW, it's there. We should take it into consideration. And with regard to this treaty, how do you see it evolving further? What are the prospects of it becoming like customary law in the future? And also, the TPNW members continue to argue that the treaty is complementary to the NPT, something that it's not always agreed between the international community, and rather because they argue that it is complementary and does not undermine the NPT. So what are your thoughts on this complementarity between the two instruments?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. Well, this is a very controversial topic, TPNW, the Bond Treaty. I would try to be neutral, to provide elements, and then everyone could draw their own conclusions. The TPNW brings strengths and limitation to the goal of the world free of nuclear weapons. It keeps disarmament firmly on the global agenda, highlighting the catastrophic and humanitarian consequence of the use of nuclear weapons. I say that the Bond Treaty underscores the urgent needs to disarmament, acting as some kind of moral call to action and keeping it visible in the public and diplomatic arenas. Yet it is also has significant limitations. The most important have been said, as you know, the lack of involvement by nuclear armed states and their allies, not only nuclear armed states, but also their allies. The treaty has legal provisions cover development, testing, possession, and use of nuclear weapons, but it lacks provisions about arms control measures as steps toward disarmament. It is a take it or leave it instrument. In addition, the divide between strong support and strong opposition clearly pictures the conceptual disagreement surrounding the role of nuclear weapons in international security. On the positive side, I would say, the two meetings of state parties so far, with the second in New York in late 2023, have brought remarkable achievements, such as advances on cooperative schemes to assist victims of nuclear weapons and nuclear testing. Also, parties explicitly decide to challenge deterrence narratives that present nuclear weapons as drivers of security. So it's very controversial. Additionally, the enthusiasm shown by sponsoring states and many non-governmental organizations had made the treaty a vivid and dynamic instrument. Concerning the prospect of becoming a customary law, many wonder whether TPNW would evolve into customary law. In my opinion, this development is unlikely, as customary law requires practice, particularly from those affected directly or involved. In this case, nuclear armed states. For the treaty to transition into customary law, nuclear armed states should shift their posture, that is not likely, and considerably align to the TPNW's goals over time, not immediately, but over time. Another quite usual question is whether Bond Treaty weakens in practice the NPT framework. A point this was raised by opponents from the outset. I think that such risk has been overstated. The only point of concern, in my opinion, given the current stance of things, is that dividing resources, attention, and diplomatic effort between both instruments could dilute focus and therefore results. However, we should note that TPNW, or Ban Treaty, primarily engages with the NPT's Article 6, which commits states to advance on nuclear disarmament, and in a subsidiary way, the Article 3 in terms of verification and safeguards, while the NPT states as the comprehensive legal tool dealing with disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Look toward the future, as has been repeatedly said here, the evidence shows that all legal instruments and frameworks will face increasing pressure. The recent Trump's victory in the United States adds even more uncertainty to the complex global arena. Even so, we can say that consolidated international tools like the NPT has shown the resilience in the past. It is important to remark that efforts should be oriented toward advancing on concrete and realistic narratives and proposals. In terms of the TPNW, the NPT and other key instruments, action should focus on practical, transparent, irreversible, and verifiable outcomes, be they in terms of disarmament or arms control. A crucial step is to advocate in restoring the strategic dialogue between the US and Russia through recovering and extending the capabilities of New START that is expiring in February 2026. This bilateral treaty has previously succeeded in reducing nuclear arsenals and setting advanced verification practices. It requires from all actors strategic thinking, political will, and negotiation skills. It's still a question mark if leaders will meet this challenge ahead. So, with this complex framework, the NPT must be preserved and strengthened, recognizing that geopolitical conflicts, such as the ongoing war in Ukraine and the increasing instability in the Middle East, complicate the treaty's objective. To summarize, I have 3 suggestions for the NPT review process. Of course, they are debatable, but I have sustained them since many, many years ago. The first is that a healthy approach to the review process would be to give up past traditions and separate short-term conflict-driven issues from the broader enduring goals of the treaty. Those issues should not overshadow the parties' core commitments to the NPT. The consensus breakdown at the 10th RevCon over Ukraine clearly shows the need to keep foundational treaty issues separate from temporary geopolitical conflicts. The second point, and very symbolic, is to revise the approach to the RevCon final document, proposing that it reflects both agreement and disagreements, rather than adopting no final document if a stance of consensus is not achieved. Such a paradigm shift used in other multilateral forums like the G20, for example. Finally, a good idea developed in the past but never applies is to establish practical joint voluntary commitments by groups of states of specific topics, similar to the approach of the nuclear security summits. Of course, to go beyond the NPT, it's clear that other forums should be created and reactivated to engage every nuclear armed state in disarmament and arms control measures. To close, the path forward requires a pragmatic and realistic but innovative approach. We face a dual challenge: to strengthen the NPT and complementary, to take advantage of the TPNW's valuable role to keep nuclear disarmament in the global agenda. Also, we must understand that each state's decision to become a TPNW party will remain a political choice, largely shaped by governments' beliefs, geopoliticals, and alliances that often extend beyond nuclear affairs. It's true that the refundational approach to reduce nuclear global insecurity should be built on the commitment of nuclear armed states. It could be along the lines of the January 2022 joint statement by the five NPT recognized nuclear weapon states, in which they affirm a nuclear war cannot be won and must never fought. However, new nuclear weapon states, that are the majority, with flawless gradation, should never forgo the opportunity to act as facilitators in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irma. Now we are opening the floor for questions. Oh, wow, several. Okay, that's gonna start, well, here, and then behind. On the third row, please. Can you come with the microphone?
Thank you very much, Dio.
Yes.
Very interesting panel. I have lots of questions.
Please introduce yourself and say to who do you want to address the question
Sure.
to.
My name is Mahmoud Hamdi. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
First, I have lots of questions, so I have to select now and choose. I just have a very minor comment regarding what you said, Mr. Kronberg, about Egypt walking away from the NPT. I don't think this has happened before. It's news for me, but anyway, we can discuss this later. I might just choose Mr. Bolot to ask him a question about a scenario of an Iranian nuclear test. Just a hypothetical scenario. How would the RevCon deal with that? The RevCon works on consensus, and yes, the treaty hasn't entered into force, but also hypothetically, just try to think that the OSI is working. If you have the OSI just fully operational, what can you do in this case? Thank you.
Thanks. We are going to take two more questions here in front, in the first row.
Thank you, Alan Webb from Basel Peace Office and Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. I'd like to follow up Taya's comment about the work that ELN, the European Leadership Network, has been done on inadmissibility of threat and use of nuclear weapons. We saw traction on this, particularly amongst the G20 with their summit statement on inadmissibility of threat or use of nuclear weapons. And the question is, in terms of taking that further or operationalizing it in terms of policy change, it seems the best approach to that is to move on no first use. It's very unlikely to get a comprehensive prohibition on the use of nuclear weapons, as India's proposed, but no first use, we're getting a lot of traction in the NPT review conference. So how might this be taken up in the next NPT? Is there a possibility of looking at the range of different approaches, unilateral no first use, bilateral no first use declarations, regional, etc.? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And a third question over there on the fifth row.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's open. It's on. It's on.
It's on.
Okay. I hope you hear me.
No, it's not on.
Oh.
And now it's on.
Yes, I address my questions to my long-time friend Jacek. These are naive comments. Please don't take them seriously. Try to take them in a good spirit. And this is to do with the agency. I'm a big fan of the agency. However, I would like to comment on some of the aspects that you have raised. Number one, for a simple analyst like me, coming from Jordan, from the Middle East, I don't buy that the agency is not able to verify the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. At the end of the day, 85% of the agency's resources are currently devoted to the Iran file. And please convince me, Jacek, that 85% of the agency's resources are not good enough to verify the agency's, the Iran's compatibility. 60%, yes, but Iranians were trying to send a message. As you know, GCPOA is now abolished, literally, technically, but everybody wants Iranian side to be sticking to their equation. You speak about the Syrian issue. And I assume that you are referring to Al-Kubar nuclear site, which was bombed by the Israelis. If you have evidence, if the Israelis knows for sure that this is a nuclear site hosting a clandestine activity, you don't bomb the evidence. You sustain it and you call the agency. Now we are in a mess. We cannot know if the debris on the site are resulting from Israeli munitions, which was used to demolish the site, or if it's coming from illegal clandestine activities. And then you speak about the zone, and everybody knows that the agency is not mandated by the zone. I mean, technically speaking and legally speaking, the agency's mandate is to verify the non-diversion of nuclear facilities, nuclear and fissile materials. The zone, we know for sure that the agency provided some documents in the 2012 process for Mr. Yakundayava. That's long gone. And lastly, we have a communication problem. I have tried to report this to the agency. Director General Grossi goes to Tehran. He speaks in a very positive vibe. He goes back to Vienna. He flips, shifts, and becomes really negative. Director General Grossi visits Tel Aviv before influential and crucial decision taken by the governing board, specifically decisions pertaining to Iran. I hope this is within the mandate. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So let's gonna answer this first row of questions. Let's gonna start with Tarja because most of them were directed to you, two of them at least, then Joseph, I think, and then finally Jacek.
Okay. I think we can discuss whether Egypt walked out or not. I think it is mentioned often as the only example of a walkout from NPT review conference. I would like to point to the question of nuclear threats, and I didn't really have time to go into this question. The question is that Russia has actually used different kinds of nuclear threats, and there has been this G20 agreement that twice Russia has agreed that nuclear threats are inadmissible. And this is sort of a way to supplement the International Court of Justice, which actually decided that there was this possibility of using nuclear weapons if the survival of the state is in question. So this is trying to push for an approach to nuclear threats and also nuclear use, saying that these are not accepted and this should be the norm in the situation. The question and the difficulty here is that what is a nuclear threat? Is it if the president of Russia says that this will have catastrophic consequences we have never seen before? Or is it actually a concrete approach to a threat? So this should be also seen in the NPT, that if the inadmissibility is built into the question, then the threat should be defined. Maybe I...
Yes, Joseph, you wanted to
Sure.
come back?
Yep.
Yes.
So the question was asked about a nuclear test, and I'll treat the question as being a nuclear test by a state signatory. Could be, I suppose, any state signatory. Of course, in the lifetime of the Preparatory Commission, there's only been a nuclear test carried out by a non-state signatory, and we've seen what happens in that case. And actually, a lot of the steps that took place in those cases, you'd find happening even if it was a state signatory that is carrying out a nuclear test. We'd detect it, we'd analyze it, we'd release the data to our state signatories, we'd publicize it. There would almost certainly be a preparatory commission meeting called. Beyond that, though, I mean, the question is, what would the preparatory commission then do? The challenge that we face in this pre-entry into force environment is precisely that we don't have really the mechanisms that, and when I say we, I mean collectively, we don't have the mechanisms that the treaty provides for in dealing with situations of non-compliance with the treaty. Someone who carries out a nuclear test today is not breaking a legally binding prohibition. they're breaking a norm against nuclear testing, but there's no legally binding prohibition. So almost certainly the Security Council would be seized of a nuclear test, and then there would be other things that would likely happen. You talked about OSI. So obviously we don't have OSI right now. OSI is a mechanism that is provided for in case there's doubt. If there's serious doubt about whether or not a nuclear test has been carried out, there's a situation where a state is suspected, it denies it, there's consultation and clarification, they still deny it. A member state could request an OSI, in which case we would have inspectors go on site to see what they could find, and of course there are very strict procedures about how they would carry out their work. That would be the sole purpose, though, of the inspection. But of course, we don't have that mechanism right now. So.
Well, many thanks, Joseph. And Jacek?
Yes, I mean, just to follow on, obviously, on-site inspections have been exercised, have been tried as an exercise in the history of CTBTO, including in Jordan, with lessons learned being discussed at a regional meeting in Israel at the time when there was some hope that maybe there would be progress on the ratification of CTBT in the region. And I'm sort of saying this because the agency is also assisting CTBTO with equipment and with some expertise on this. And I think another OSI is in preparation in Asia in the years to come. But of the 4 questions asked by my friend, Dr. Ayman Khalil, I'm not sure I have heard correctly the last one about communications. I'll try to answer the first 3 ones. It's not true that 85% of agencies' resources and budget are devoted to inspecting Iran. Far less of it. But it is true that we have inspections in Iran. And I started with this. We have inspectors there all the time. Even during COVID, we had inspectors. We have them today, and we managed to rotate them. However, it does not mean that we can testify to the world that we have confidence in the exclusively peaceful nature of Iranian nuclear program. And there is a number of reasons for this. The legal instruments for our inspections are not there. Iran is not implementing the additional protocol. Iran is not implementing modified code 3.1 of the subsidiary arrangements to the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. What does it mean in practice? According to the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement, the agency only verifies the correctness of the submission of the country. The country says we have so much nuclear material. We check whether what the list they provide to us is correct. But according to the additional protocol, we could also check the completeness, whether there is nothing else beyond this. We cannot do this now. It was temporarily applied under JCPOA. Iran stopped applying the additional protocol. Modified code 3.1 means that when the country starts to plan for a nuclear facility, it shares information with an agency. Provides early design information of the facility. We can prepare our safeguards approaches for this. We are not 100% sure that there are no other nuclear facilities in Iran because of this. This is why the DG is saying in his reports what he's saying. And it's a long story. I was vice chair of the Board of Governors back in 2005 when we reported Iran to the UN Security Council. So it's not a new issue. We are trying to resolve this, and as I say, the DG will have talks in Iran to make some progress on this. But I don't think it should be banalized. That we should be able to say something of which we are not really confident. I mean, the report that the DG is providing on such issues to the Board of Governors, every word is very carefully considered, chosen, and sometimes hours are spent on discussing how we should describe the current situation. Syria being a mess, yes, I mean, it is a mess, this situation, but it's because the facility which was being built had not been reported to the IAEA. So again, DG Grossi is trying to move the situation forward from a stalemate. And we had visits to these sites. We have our experts, our inspectors have taken environmental samples, which are currently being analyzed. Agency is not mandated by the WMD free zone. I mean, I think you have misspoken, but the agency certainly is relevant to the implementation and verification of nuclear weapon free zones, other nuclear weapon free zones, which are already in force. It is, we are able to, through our safeguard system, to verify those zones. I mean, the arrangements are different for different regions. In the case of Latin America, it's different than when it comes in terms of Africa. So, but we are the instrument which verifies the nuclear weapon free zones. We have experience in this respect. We are sharing this experience within the WMD Free Zone Conference process in the United Nations, in the intersessional meetings. However, the agency cannot negotiate the zone by itself. It is always an agreement of the countries and the countries of the region. A zone also cannot be imposed on a region. There are guidelines by inside the United Nations how nuclear free zones can be arrived at. It took a huge effort under an experienced Egyptian diplomat to develop these guidelines, how nuclear weapon free zones are being negotiated. And it is clear that it should be done in an inclusive manner from inside the region, keeping the nuclear weapon countries informed about this process. And this is what is happening. Yeah, and the issue of communications, let's discuss it offline, because I heard, obviously, DG Grossi, I consider him a great communicator, and he does communicate, but you said there is some problem with communications. Let's discuss it later, maybe, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. We are going to go for a last quick round of questions. So,
okay, so maybe this question can be asked again. Okay. So
okay. So if you
there was a communication problem.
There was a communication problem. Yes. Over there at the end, behind. No, the lady behind. Yes. Thanks. Brief questions and brief answers, please.
So, Katrin Chimizu from the German MFA. And I think, and I hope we all share the goal of maintaining and strengthening the NPT, and therefore my question would be, in the current security environment, how would you as a panelist define a successful outcome of the NPT RevCon? Is it really only to be measured in a consensus report? Is consensus on very thin substance better than having a huge majority agreeing on real substance? Is it like small steps, progress in certain topics? Is it not so much about substance, but rather on mitigating polarization? That would be my question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Another question? Yes, over there.
My name is Precious, one of the mentees and an intern at the ICC. I wrote my thesis on the NPT review conferences, comparing the expectations that went into the conference and their outcomes from 1995 to 2022. So I'm pretty much excited about this session. And my question goes to Ambassador Akan, since you're a chair of one of the preparatory committees. So from my research, I understood that the factors that influence the outcome of the review conferences span across varying reasons, including the leadership of key countries. For example, when Obama was president, there were like much more progress in the NPT review conferences and disarmament issues as opposed to George Bush. The fact that the leadership of the conference preparatory committees and those in charge also influences the outcome of the conference, and also like peer pressure. When certain states are doing certain things, it can influence other states to compromise. So my question is, based on some of these factors that influence the outcome of the conference, what concrete steps has been undertaken, for example, by the preparatory committee to ensure that some of these factors that usually influence the non-adoption of a consensus is prevented. And for example, given the fact that the last conference could not be adopted, a consensus could not be adopted because of the mention of Zaporizhia and Russia, given that the war is still continuing, this could be a potential reason for another non-adoption of a consensus. And I'm curious to know like what the preparatory committee is doing to avoid a blockage on this basis, since the war is still ongoing and this issue could be brought. And also the election of President Trump as president, which could also influence the outcome. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on these issues and what you foresee as the outcome of the 2026 conference. Thank you.
Many thanks. Ambassador, if you want to just reply that direct question to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think these two questions actually are interconnected with among each other. And the first part is about mitigating polarization. The second, how to ensure the success if there is contentious development. So mitigating of polarization, I think really, if you let me, to be based on my own experience, and when it came to the final discussions on the document and the chairman's reflection, a factual summary, as I said, many countries were not happy with that, and it took some time to try to convince countries to take. It was not a policy, take it or leave it, but it was just to try to convince them to take it as the only viable and only negotiable language. And I tried my best, for example, when it comes to polarization. Honestly speaking, if we speak, beyond any political or geopolitical context, beyond the conflict in Ukraine or wherever, many diplomats are really very experienced in bringing about really very interesting ideas, creative ideas. So does Russian delegation. Again, without any connection to a context. But whatever Russian delegation produces, it is momentarily gets rejected by other delegations. Because whatever it produces, it becomes toxic. And no one wants to, to go ahead with this proposal, whether it's valuable, whether it's creative, or whether it's aimed at attaining some practical result eventually. It's just a matter of politicization. And the very last day and very last minutes, I was about just to say, okay, we have to leave that. And then we started discussions, and many delegations raised their hands and nameplates and saying, no, we don't like that. We don't want this proposal. It was a quite interesting proposal how we could mitigate the language and reach the consensus. And then I asked the straightforward question, please, is there any delegation wishing to say no to this proposal? Please raise your hand and say no. And no one did that, meaning that by their understanding, they feel it works, but by their, emotional or, of course, political or whatsoever approach, they reject that. Again, I think maybe in this regard, the role of how we approach different delegations, how we try to be open and receptive to every delegation without any exception, helped us in this regard. And sometimes maybe we have to ask very straightforward questions, whether you want it or not. And to avoid the blockade, what my colleagues asked about that, how we can attain the success and avoid the blockade, I think we have to be, again, very, creative, flexible, ready for compromise, and eloquent at the same time. And in order to, of course, to have some kind sort of feeling of your personal involvement. It's like a duty, but it's your a chance of yourself, of your team, and all the countries engaged into the discussion to find the kind of ownership to the final document. And I think only with this we could at least try to attain some practical result.
Many thanks. Do you want to make some comments on the human legal?
Yes.
Very telegraphic.
Yeah, very telegraphic. I think that there are two planes. The planes of geopolitical short-term conflicts and the root causes that made NPT sustainable through the treaty through the time. I think that is a big mistake to mix both things in the RevCons, even in the PrepCons, because if we see the situation, the world situation, the geopolitical situation, it's unthinkable to have a possibility of consensus if you mix these conflicts. It shouldn't be addressed within the debates of the PrepCons and NPT RevCon. This made failure to consensus in the last RevCon in 2022. And concerning the consensus itself, it's a procedural rule that should be changed. I think that it's very difficult to change the diplomatic traditions concerning how things are done, and I wouldn't like to be in the shoes of the president of the NPTs and the PrepCons, Rev and PrepCons. But it would be more realistic to reflect in the final documents agreements and disagreements. It would be more honest and more, it implies to change things, but to protect NPT for the future, and given the international context, it's necessary to make so strong change. Thank you.
Also very
yes. Just to say that I'm not a supporter of consensus document, but rather looking at the substance in the actual situation. And if you look at the substance in 2026, I think to try to curtail proliferation will be the most important factor. In the Ukraine war, a lot of people have seen that nuclear deterrence works, and there's a lot of interest for countries to acquire nuclear deterrence. And so I think it would be important in this case, with the unconditional, legally based security guarantees for non-nuclear countries, that they don't have to be afraid for their security.
Well, many thanks for your questions, many thanks for your answers and your interventions. Let's give an applause to our speakers. Thank you.